Hello, dear friends. I am talking to you from Bucharest, Romania. I had a program with the university and also with the Jewish community, a place I have visited in the past many times. And I'd like to repeat some of the ideas that I said on Friday night at the Jewish Community Center at the dinner. I'm talking to you right before Shavuot, a few days before the festival of Shavuot, just after Jerusalem Day. And this is the time of Sfirat omer, the counting of the omer. And it's a very unusual time that we have days that connect between Passover and Shavuot. What is the meaning of these days of the counting? Well, the first thing seems to be when you count, there's an anticipation. You want to receive the Torah. Because according to our tradition, Shavuot, Pentecost, is the day, Jewish Pentecost, is the day that not only is it the festival of the harvest, but we have a tradition in the Talmud that the Torah was given on that same day, the 6th of Sivan. And what does it mean the Torah was given? It means that God spoke the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, to the Jewish people on that day. That is the receiving of the Torah in our tradition. Of course, the actual Torah is received later on the desert, according to the Talmud in Megillah, page 60. But the point is that the revelation at Sinai, where the whole Jewish people stood and had that primary revelation with God, that is considered receiving of the Torah. But actually in Hebrew, we don't say receiving of the Torah, we say Zman Matan Toratenu, which means the time of giving of the Torah. Because God can give the Torah, but we have to receive. So you cannot have a festival of receiving of the Torah. You have to prove that you're receiving the Torah. And receiving the Torah is bringing it into your life, making your life meaningful through the message of the Torah. That is the idea of receiving it. So that doesn't have a particular day. It could happen any time. But the giving of the Torah was Shavuot. I also like to mention that in the book of Shemot, when it talks about the tabernacle, and Moses is told by God to tell Bitzalel, the architect of the tabernacle, to make all the various vessels, it always says in the singular, Vasita, you shall do this, you shall do this. Only in one case is there an exception. With the making of the Ark of the Covenant, where the tablets of the 10 Commandments stood. So there it says Ve'asu in the plural. And the Or Chaim, Rav Chaim ben Attar explains that's because when it comes to the Torah, you need the whole Jewish people to keep it. It's not only for the individual, it has to be for the people as a community keeping the Torah, because there are some parts of the Torah the individual cannot keep. Like Hakel, which is a mitzvah in the 8th year, the year after the sabbatical year, to come to Jerusalem, all the people. So the receiving of the Torah, therefore, is on the individual and on the communal level. So I'd like to look at Sfirat omer, the counting of the omer, both on the individual and the communal level. On the individual level, I want to tell a story, and this story is brought in the Talmud and the Midrash. The Midrash says that when the Jews, on the 7th day of Passover, which is right near the beginning of the counting of the omer, there was a splitting of the sea, meaning 6th day, on the 7th, what today is called the 7th day of Passover, commemorates the splitting of the sea, when the Jews came to the sea after leaving Egypt. And the Jews complained to Moses, what are we supposed to do? The sea's in front of us, Pharaoh's behind us, what are we going to do? Moses turns to God. God says, just tell the Israelites, go forward. That's all. All they have to do is move forward. Okay, so Moses says to them, move forward, but they look at the sea. They don't want to go through. Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the head of his tribe and related to Aaron, he said, if God says we move forward, we move forward. So he walked into the water, and the water was up to his waist, but the sea didn't split. So he kept going forward because God said to go forward, and the water was now up to his arm, to his shoulders, but the sea didn't split. But God said to move forward, so he moved forward, and the water came right up to his nose. The moment it came to his nose, the sea split. because sometimes you got to take a risk when God says to move forward. So this is story number one. Story number two. I'm going all the way to the end now of the Omer, to the Shavuot holiday. On the Shavuot holiday, we have a long-standing tradition of reading the book of Ruth on Shavuot. What is the story of Ruth? Of course, it tells the lineage of King David, according to our tradition, was born and died on the day of Shavuot. But also tells the story of a young woman by the name of Ruth, who was married to Machlon, the son of Naomi, and Machlon passes away. And Naomi says to Ruth, you don't have to follow me back home. I appreciate the fact that you care about me. You don't want me to be alone, but what do you have in Bethlehem? You're a Moabite. Go back home. You have nothing to look forward to. You don't know anybody there. But Ruth hears that calling, and she wants to be part of the Jewish people. And she says, do not tell me to go back. For your people are my people, and your God is my God. Wherever you shall go, I shall go. Wherever you shall sleep, I shall sleep. Only death will separate us. And Naomi saw that she was determined, so she stopped saying anything and let her come with her. Ruth was very willing to take that risk. She came in from the outside, left her people, her culture, her religion, everything, for something she didn't know exactly how she would be treated, but she felt that calling like Abraham before her. That's why in our tradition, all converts are called children of Abraham, who heard the calling from God and left his father's house to go to Canaan, the land of Canaan. It's taking the risk. Now, I have to explain that, of course, there's sometimes we know in advance that taking the risk is foolish, so we don't do it. But I'm talking about cases where we know that the risk really outweighs, the benefits outweigh the risk. And sometimes we just don't do it because we're complacent, because not doing is easier. If you want to receive the Torah, you have to take that risk. Shavuot has no date in our tradition. All the festivals do. Rosh Hashanah is the first day of what's called the 7th month Tishrei. Yom Kippur is on the 10th of that month. Passover is on the 15th of Nisan. We know all these things. Shavuot has no date. You have to count. You have to take the effort. And you have to count every day to get there. So it's an effort and it's a risk. I want to talk about one other risk, and this is the last one. But you'll see it's more involved. Just like there's individual risks, there are national risks for the Jewish people. On the 27th day of Iyar, the day before Jerusalem Day, is the Yortzeit of Samuel the prophet, Shmuel Hanavi, the day that he passed away. Now, in our tradition, Samuel is a great prophet. King David says in the Psalms, Moses and Aaron in their priesthood, and Samuel, the one who calls out to God, calls out his name. So after the prophecy of Moses, Samuel is one of the great prophets. Samuel anoints the first king, Saul, and he also anoints the second king, David. And David says to Samuel, I'd like to build a temple for God. First, Samuel thought that was a great idea, but God said to him, look, since the time they left Egypt, nobody ever built a house for me. There was just, of course, the tabernacle. And then eventually in the Chronicles, David is told, not you, but your son Solomon will build the house to God, which is the temple. But the Talmud says there were meetings between Samuel and David. And in these meetings, Samuel told him where it's going to be. It's going to be in the city of Yevus. But David realized that Yevus was not under his sovereignty. So he had to fight against the Jebusites and take over the city, which becomes Jerusalem. And then he buys the barn of Aravna, which was the place that Abraham had brought Isaac for a potential sacrifice on Mount Moriah, just to make sure there are no legal problems, because he knows that that's the spot where the temple will be built by his son. David takes the risk, prepares the ground for Solomon to be the one to build the temple. Well, there's one last tradition that I want to mention during this time between Passover and Shavuot. A very strange story in the Talmud, because you would think that the time between Passover and Shavuot should be a time of happiness. But the Talmud said it's a time of sadness, because there was a story of Rabbi Akiva, the great rabbi of the 2nd century, who our Mishnah follows almost completely in Jewish law, according to his opinions. It says that Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and almost all of them died during this period between Passover and Shavuot, except for the day of Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. And the Talmud says it was a strange phenomenon. It was a magefa, some type of plague that attacked them. Talmud doesn't go into more detail. Strange, a plague that takes exactly 7 weeks. Usually plagues take months and they go from place to place, and it stops on one day on Lag BaOmer and just continues the day after. What is this all about? In a letter, which is called the Epistle of Rav Shira Gaon, written in the 8th century in Aramaic, Rabbi Shira Gaon in Babylonia tells us the story of the oral tradition. And when he talks about Rabbi Akiva, he mentions that his students died not in a disease, not in a magefa, in a plague, but he says in shmada, in Hebrew shmad, which means normally when there's a foreign non-Jewish government who passes laws against Judaism and the Jewish people. Well, we know that Rabbi Akiva was very active in the Bar Kokhba revolt of Shimon ben Kuziba from 132 to 135. And we also know now that one of the main reasons for the breakout of the Bar Kokhba revolt, when it did happen, was because under Hadrian decided to make Jerusalem a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina, to ban Jews from it. And this was just too much for the Jewish community. Turning Jerusalem, bad enough you destroyed the temple, turning Jerusalem into a pagan city, into a pagan temple, that was too much. That was the catalyst of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Rabbi Akiva, and Maimonides points this out too, was a supporter of Bar Kokhba. I'm assuming his students as well. And most probably, and others have said this like Rav Tzvi Huda Kook and others, that during this time of the Sfira, there must have been a battle of the Bar Kokhba revolt, in which the students of Rabbi Akiva died, or into one source, even a son of Rabbi Akiva died during this battle. Akiva himself is burned by the Romans at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135, so he also does not live much after the revolt. So here we have a story of Akiva and many of the sages of Israel and the leaders who felt it was time to try to take Jerusalem back. They took the risk. They took an ultimate risk. And even though they failed, in their eyes, there was a reason to take that risk. We know today, by the way, that there were many revolts that happened after the Bar Kokhba revolt, specifically under Hadrian, who was a very difficult time for the Jewish people. Today, there's a certain significance to that, because in the modern state of Israel today, all the national days of the state of Israel all happen exactly during this time, between Passover and Shavuot. Whether we're talking about Yom HaShoah, the day of the Holocaust, remembrance, of course, Yom HaZikaron, Soldiers' Memorial Day, Yom HaTzmaut, Israel Independence Day, Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, when the city was united. All these days happen exactly between Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot. So what does this mean? In my humble opinion, these are the times when the Jewish people, because we learn from our sages, from Rabbi Akiva, this is the time to take the risk for the Jewish people, not only on an individual level, but on a general level. And that's exactly what happened. We took the risk during this time. First one was the 5th day of Iyar, which was the Declaration of Independence. And Harry Truman sent a message to David Ben-Gurion. Don't do it. Don't declare the state. We have intelligence that tells us that 7 Arab states are going to send armies against you. So Ben-Gurion turned to Yigal Allon and said, Yigal, what are the chances of our Haganah, of our defenses, standing up against 7 Arab armies? Allon said, not better than 50-50. Ben-Gurion said, in the last 2,000 years, when did the Jewish people have such good odds at taking back the land of Israel? Of course, this was more complicated because that wasn't the only reason. The reason also was this was 1948, 3 years after the Shoah, and Ben-Gurion felt that the Jewish people had their back to the wall. And he also felt if now, either now or never. And he felt that the price was worth it because of what happened at the Shoah. To quote somebody who I don't know who was, who once said, we have 2 days, Yom HaShoah, the day of the Shoah, and the day and Soldiers' Memorial Day. Soldiers' Memorial Day represents the day that represents the price we had to pay to have a Jewish state. And Yom HaShoah represents the day where we realized the price we had to pay when we didn't have a state. So these are the days of taking risks. And all the days, national days of the Jewish state are during these days. In a sense, we're redeeming Rabbi Akiva and the Bar Kokhba revolt, who so wanted to succeed, but were unable to. And today we use these same days to take that risk and to build that state, to be a light to the nations of the world. Shalom, shalom.